Hello everybody. This week we have a special guest, Anne van Otterloo from For Dementia. This is an amazing story. And Anne, I'd like to welcome you.
Thank you, Graham. Glad to be here. Glad to be with you.
And for those who don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but another name for dementia is Alzheimer's. Is that correct?
That's not completely correct, because dementia is the more umbrella term for all kinds of dementia, and Alzheimer's is one form. It's the most common, but there are other forms of dementia as well. There is frontal lobe dementia. There is also vascular dementia, which has to do with the blood veins and being cluttered. And so, yeah, there's 4 different types, actually, and Alzheimer's is one of them.
Okay, that's something I didn't know.
Yes.
So you've started a business called For Dementia, but there's always an origin. And what really interests me is, how did you get into this field?
Well, Graham, that is my personal experience, because I happened to fall in love when I was 46 with this great guy. His name is Hank, and within 1 year we were living together outside in the country. We had a little farmhouse which he was rebuilding and doing up, and it was all beautiful romance until 3 years after I met him. Some things started really being weird, according to my experience. But it wasn't until 3 years later, 2003, that he was diagnosed with frontal lobe dementia. And so, yeah, I was on this adventure with him for quite a while. And on the 8th of July, it will be 3 years since he died. So it was a journey of 11 years.
What, you nursed him for 11 years?
Yeah, I had to bring him to a nursing home at a certain point, because he was unable to look after himself. Because when we had a diagnosis, Graham, the first thing that the neurologist said was, well, yes, this is lethal, he's going to die. Secondly, he will go back to a baby state, because he will lose all his language. He won't have speech anymore. And thirdly, I don't know how long it will take, but anyway, she said a lot of things, and they all came true. So it was quite an experience.
Then this is an amazing story. What did you learn through this period of time? You know, when you were going through this with him?
Well, what I learned, Graham, is that the most important thing I learned is that dementia is not the end of the world. And what I learned is that when a human being goes into a state of dementia, this human being is still present, still human, still feels everything, but that person is not the same as he or she used to be. So Henk was not the same as he used to be, but in his true nature, in his true self, he was still the same, he was still there, only in his behavior and the way in which he was present and in which he showed himself, he was someone different. But that change of personality, that total change of character, what happens when people go into a state of dementia, is so frightening for us looking at those our loved ones, that we go into a state of frantic fear, and we feel we don't know what is happening to us, and we become very frightful because we feel this is the worst thing that can happen to us. Because well, I was fortunate that I hadn't been in such a long-term relationship with Hank, only 3 years. So I have known him longer in a state of dementia than in a normal state. But most people, they have couples especially, usually they have had relationships of 30, 40 years, sometimes 50. When one of them goes into a state of dementia, that is very, very uncomfortable situation, you see. But what I experience is that it's not the end of the world, and that you can still experience a lot of joy and love with the demented partner in a different way, but still the way dementia is seen. And here in the Netherlands, there was an article in the newspaper today that in 20 years' time, dementia will be the national disease #1 that will cause people to die. Research has been done, and it's made so heavy, it's made so uncomfortable. And I believe if, we look at it that way, how will we be able to cope if we can't access joy, if we can't access love anymore in that way?
And let me get my head around this. You're saying that from your perspective, there appears to be some form of energy going on behind the scene that enables you to connect with Hank on a deeper level. So there's a I think you used the word nature. You said there was two natures, but on this level you could connect with him in the area of joy and love. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, okay. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I could still enjoy his presence, I could still laugh with him, and the facts at that moment were that he didn't have speech, he couldn't talk, he would be, without any means of expression, also body language. But still, I was able to connect with him. And I discovered this, Graham, because of course, like all of the people, all of the carers, when it happens to them, and when your loved one goes into that state, that's something you don't want, because it's very uncomfortable. You don't want that change. You can't accept it. So you do everything that is in your power. And I did everything that was in my power to stop it, to change it, whatever. And until the moment I discovered, and I was so tired of trying that when I do that, what am I doing? I am fighting death, or am I fighting life? Am I fighting living? Because I wasn't present, I wasn't in the moment, I was always seeing what was not there anymore, focused on the problems, not focused on the reality of the situation and what could be experienced in the moment. Enjoy what I could still enjoy, what did still work. I was completely focused on everything that did not work, and I was a victim, I was complaining, and I tried everything, went to every healer to find a way out of the situation. Until the moment that I stopped doing that, and then I discovered, well, I am frightened of the idea of death. So I might as well start living now and enjoy life while he is still present, instead of focusing on the fear of him going, because he's going anyway.
Would you say that fear actually drove you into resistance?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. I was resisting that situation, in every cell of my body. I was just, yeah, I just couldn't cope with it. I found the partner of my life, and after 3 years, he's going to change into someone I don't, and all my dreams about, he and I getting all together in the countryside, having a wonderful life, enjoying each other's company, being on travels, it all went up in smoke. I didn't want that. I wanted that dream back. But that dream, that wasn't reality.
So how did you deal with this resistance then?
Well, um, good question. What I did was I asked for help. And right in the beginning, I went to see a spiritual healer because something in me felt, wow, this is so big. I just need to have support in this process. And I met this woman, and she brought me in contact with another spiritual healer, and I took a course with him, and he taught me all about awareness, being aware of myself, witness what is happening, and not going into the situation, but witnessing the situation, and then discovering that I have a choice. Because if I stay out of the resistance, but witness the resistance, then I can choose whether I go right or left. And then I can choose whether I want to feel that desperate state of resistance, or that I want to create a different situation for myself.
A lot of people don't realize that free will is a part of our being, but not that many people actually access free will because they aren't aware. And as you just said, awareness brings choice, and then
Yeah.
that choice creates free will. Can you give me a bit of an idea, or can you describe what awareness is?
Well, for me, it is, tracking in my physical body, in my energetic body, in my emotions, and also, my intuitive being, tracking all those different parts of me, and then knowing that I'm not my body, I'm not my emotions, I'm not even my physical being, but there is more than just that. There is an awareness that I can witness, that is, well, you could call it the greater me, or the self, or with a capital S, or there's lots of names for it, but I discovered it. I discovered that, with practice, because it is a practice, I could stay out of that. And with practice, I could choose a different kind of behavior. And when I did that, I discovered that I was actually creating my own reality. And you know, Graham, what was the best thing of all, when I completely surrendered to the situation and was with Hank in his state of dementia, I discovered that all he was doing was being. And I picked up, that being of what his self, and it really gave me so much joy because I discovered that when I had been with him, and I would come into the home when I was visiting him, and I wouldn't really be very cheerful, seeing the home, smelling the smells, and walking in the corridor up to his room, I would always think, ugh, why am I here? Why is he here? And I don't want this, and all the resistance would come up. But then being with him in his room, enjoying music, just being, because there was no speaking because he didn't have speech. So I would just be with him, and then after an hour and a half, I would leave, and then I would witness that my state of being was completely different. I was joyful, and I thought, oh, that's weird. I am joyful, and all I've done is to be with Hank, my partner. He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. Nothing of the kind. And that really made me think. That really made me think. Yeah.
So, and is this this being that you're talking about, this higher dimension, where you can be aware of the energy and the emotions and the body that you've already talked about, is that the same realm that you could actually connect to Hank with love and joy? Are we talking about the same thing here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Then after I discovered his being, I would tune into him with sound, and that was such a weird experience. When I used language, words, I would talk to him, he just walked away. He would turn his head as if I wasn't there. But when I would use sound, when I would, like, oh, he would look at me as if I was telling him a complete story. And not just 2 minutes, no, 20 minutes. We would just go and sit at the table, and I would have a conversation with him that way, as if it was a language that he was able to understand. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, saying, communicating, except for that the sounds came up intuitively, but
yeah, that's really interesting, because I've just read a book that was saying that sound and light are the how can I word it? The origin of everything. And so what you were tapping into was something that he could relate to through the sound.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so that is because you started the interview out, Graham, to ask me, why did you start Heart for Dementia? Well, that is why I started Heart for Dementia, because I believe through that experience that people with dementia are viewed from our point of view, the ones not with dementia, in a very particular way. I'm not saying that all of the people are doing that, but when I read this article in the newspaper, and see it on the news saying dementia will be cause of death #1 in the next 20 years here in the Netherlands, I think there's a fear created, and it's not necessary. Why create this fear? Why create this enormous resistance against a state of being that we as human beings come in when we are born? When we are born, when we are babies, we are just energy. We don't have any behavior, we don't know how to talk, we don't know how to communicate. All we can do is discover the world. And Graham, I've heard so many people talk about, their demented loved ones with dementia, and the things they discovered. And I've read books about that as well, that a guy who was in the board of the family of the home that Hank was in, his mother-in-law was in the house, and he said, her dementia was a blessing to us and his wife, because the personality and the behavior that his mother-in-law had when she was normal, was not very, very nice. She would always pick on her daughter, and nothing was good enough. But in her dementia, she completely turned around. She became a very pleasant woman. She loved all kinds of foods. She would really enjoy life. So he would say that the dementia of his mother-in-law was a blessing to them in that way. And I've heard also different stories. So for me, Heart for Dementia, and my goal with Heart for Dementia is really to speak out that different message, that dementia is not the end of the world, dementia is not the most terrible thing that can happen to you. Dementia is a state of being that happens to people when they go out of their lives, and some of us do it that way and others don't, but I don't see dementia as a disease in that way. I see it as a way in which people just come towards the end of their life and then go back to being that child and that baby again, in that kind of state and that kind of energy.
Yeah, I think that once we make a judgment about somebody or something, we plunge ourselves into this resistance that you were talking about, and then that's another form of non-acceptance. We don't accept people for who they are, because we're looking at the flesh, the body. We're not looking past that and seeing that that person still has their goodness and their greatness still intact.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that is, that is where, my heart feels so much compassion for the people with dementia, because they are misjudged. They are seen in a different way, and the whole system, especially in our Western world, and the way they've been set up, they don't have a choice. Then, I find it striking that when a human being comes into the world in the state of a baby, the adults especially, they all love their energy, and they say, da, 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 dee, 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 dee. How lovely, how lovely. And everyone, is all joyful and happy because of this new life. But if by the end of a human being's life, people go back into that state to end the life, then we say, oh, terrible, that person isn't alive anymore, he could better be dead. I mean, for me, that is totally incomprehensible, but it's also very, very hurtful for those people who go into dementia, because they can't they don't have a choice. You see, it's what happens to them.
I think what you're talking about is because a child, like a baby, doesn't have any judgment. And it's the judgment we start making as we start growing up that creates that gap that I talk about, that is a consequence to everything that we do.
Mm. Mm.
And we've talked about the word acceptance, and we've talked about the word surrender briefly. Do you think surrender and acceptance are the same thing?
Mm. No, no, they're not the same thing. I think surrender comes first, and then there's acceptance follows. Because surrender is to that state that we all are beyond the fear. Surrender is to that state of self that we all have beyond the fear. And when we have that, from when we are in that state of love, then it is so much more easy to accept, and to accept whatever is as real, and to stop looking at to stop non-acceptance, because in a state of surrender, whatever is in the moment and seen as real.
And when we've talked about this previously, you've mentioned that non-acceptance is a form of ego. And am I remembering that correctly? And if so, how does ego fit into this?
Well, the ego state is the non-acceptance is fed by the ego state, because the ego state, the mind doesn't want, has its own scenario. It has its own scenario because it's based on thoughts, it's based on longings, it's based on all those things that are not in the moment. And it's only in the very moment, in the realness of the very moment, that we have the opportunity to let go of the ego, when we surrender to that moment and can get to that state of acceptance.
I'll quote you here. You've said in the past, the ego is so clever to finding solutions. What do you mean by that?
Well, well, for instance, I've got this story. I didn't want. I wanted healing for Hank. So what I did was, I bought him a magnetic chain to put around his neck with magnetic force in it, and I asked him to wear the chain, and after a week he took it off, and he actually hid it from me, because what I noticed in that week is that there was change, that things were getting better in my egoic longing, but it wasn't better for him. So what he did, he just hid the thing, and I when I found it back, when I was moving after he died, he just completely hid it so that I couldn't find it. So he was very clever in that sense, not from his ego, but my ego wanted him to go back to normal.
So do you think it was your ego that was creating your resistance and
Yeah,
non-acceptance along the journey?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. And my ego came up with lots of thoughts, and I was looking for lots of opportunities in which he could change. I never asked him, "Do you want to change?" in the beginning, but what I did, I don't know if I told you this story. I asked him because I was so afraid when the fear was so great when I heard the neurologist say he's going to die. So I asked him, "Are you going? When are you going? When are you going to die?" And you know what he said? He said, "I'm coming back."
Mm.
So every time I asked him, "When are you going?" he said, "I'm coming back." So in other words, he was saying, um, I'm not going. I'm not going anywhere because I am being.
Yeah. Do you think that ego has anything to do with a lack of sense of identity?
A lack of sense of identity. Well, Graham, what comes up in me is that ego has more to do with the fear of not having an identity.
Yeah.
Um, so ego is that fear for the nothingness that is there when there is this state of awareness, of being, of nothing. It's all and nothing, but the fear for this nothingness is tremendous.
So, and what's the main message that you want to get out there to others that may have a loved one who has dementia?
Well, what I want to say to them is that dementia is not the end of the world, and what they can do for their loved ones is enormous. They can really uh, help their loved ones to stay connected to them, to stay human, to stay loved, and to feel loved if they can overcome their resistance, if they are prepared to work on their resistance and to let go of the non-acceptance. And then they can discover a whole new world. It's not the same as they have been experiencing in the relationship up to then, but it's very worthwhile. That is what I want to tell people.
And then, I mean, you you could just put your feet up and retire and just do nothing. But what is it that gives you the drive to want to share this?
Well, good question. I do ask myself now and then, why don't I put up my feet? It's the compassion. It's the compassion for the demented persons. There's something in me that feels that the way we treat them is just not right. And I feel so much compassion for all those people who go into the dementia. And I just want them to have a different life, to have a different state of being instead of the way they're treated now.
Mm. And this has been a great interview. As we finish, is there a final piece of advice you'd like to give to people out there that are going through the struggles that you've been through?
Yeah, my final piece of advice is that, we are born, and the first thing what we do in when we come into the world is cry and laugh. And so I would like to say to everyone, remember that you can cry and then you can laugh, that there is humor. It's not one or the other, it's both. And humor is a great, great help to overcome resistance.
And where are you going with this and getting your message out there? I believe you've created a website in Dutch, and you're looking to translate that over into English. Have you made progress on that yet?
Yes, the website is in English now. And the first interview is also on that website, on the English version of the website. So it's all, there's a link to the previous interview that we did. And so it's all there also in the English language now.
You want to just give us that website, and we'll also put your website below this podcast so everybody can contact you.
Yeah, it's www. Hart for Dementia. It's Heart for Dementia, but then in the Dutch spelling, and it's the difference with the English is that in Dutch, heart, there is no E. The E goes out, and then there's the Dutch spelling, and the for is VOOR instead of FOR. And then the only difference in the word dementia is that in the Dutch spelling there is an E at the end and not an A. So it's, but people can read it, then it will be obvious. And it's .nl. It's .nl.
Okay, well, we'll have the link below. And at this stage, I'd like to thank everybody for joining the Be Empowered podcast. I'm your host, Graham Hopkins. Before we go, I'm asking if I could ask the viewers and listeners to do me a favour and please leave a review on iTunes, because this is how this podcast will become more popular and reach a larger audience with a message that I think you'll agree, and on how to transform lives by managing our energy is very important. If you'd like to hear more about the concepts that Anne and I have shared today, like feeling more connected, experiencing a piece of heart that I think Anne is enjoying, feeling worthy, you can go to Amazon and download my ebook called The Manifesto of the Inspirational Mind, or you can go to my website at www.beempoweredgroup.com and download a free ebook called Know Your True Value and Worth. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of our guest, Anne van Otterloo, and your host, Graham Hopkins, we both wish you a wonderful future of freedom, peace, and abundance. Remember, change your energy, change your life.